let me take a few moments, if I can, to make my healthcare pitch. And I'll begin by pointing out that I became a healthcare professional largely by accident, serendipitously in retrospect. At the time, I was hired by Levitt Partners. I was a relatively recent graduate of law school, as Tim pointed out, disabused of the notion that the law is anywhere near as intriguing or interesting as the John Grishams and Perry Masons of the world led me to believe. Heck, I would have settled for Night Court. That's a really old reference. Maybe most of you don't get that. I had no healthcare experience at the time, though I think I mentioned in interviews that my dad is a doctor. It was kind of my weak attempt to legitimize my candidacy. And I don't think I had ever thought about working in healthcare. I'm not sure I even knew what that meant at the time beyond what my father and his colleagues do. Healthcare can, unfortunately, be narrowly thought of as the sole province of physicians, nurses, and other types of healthcare providers. And why not? They are our primary touch points with the healthcare system, the people from whom we receive our healthcare, diagnoses, treatments, medications, etc. The truth is, however, that there are more of us, i.e. non-practitioners in healthcare, than there are of them. We are attorneys, accountants, IT specialists, administrators, consultants, sales and marketing professionals, policy directors, public and governmental relations coordinators, fundraisers, and the list goes on and on. So whatever it is that you want to do with your professional lives, healthcare has a place for you. I suspect that this has long been true, but now, 2013, is an especially exciting and opportunity-rich time in healthcare, and the attendance here today is certainly evidence of that. There's an immense appetite given economic realities and ballooning healthcare costs for wholesale change, for comprehensive reform of our nation's healthcare system. The Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, which was alluded to earlier, which recently celebrated its third year, or its 3-year anniversary, has been implemented or will be implemented, and it entails a myriad of changes and reforms to our healthcare system, aimed principally at lowering healthcare costs, improving access and quality. Regardless of how well or poorly you think the ACA will accomplish these goals. And frankly, regardless of the ACA's permanence as the law of the land, healthcare needs help. I suppose I'm as prone to or as guilty of hyperbole as anyone, but I earnestly believe that healthcare will be, or perhaps is already, one of the defining issues, if not the defining issue of our generation. The problems are varied, the problems are incredibly complex and highly interesting. Don't be like the guy who refuses to hang up his acid-washed Gerboz and lose the mullet. Healthcare's moment is here, and you should be too. Okay, I've said my piece. Without further ado, seated to my right is our panel of healthcare professionals. I will dispense with reading or reciting their detailed and rather impressive bios. You've got those for your reference, I believe. Instead, I'll keep the introduction short, and to the extent it's useful or relevant, I invite the panelists to share positions that they've held, education that they've received, etc., in their remarks. Jim Sheets, if you'll raise your hand, there he is the CEO/administrator of Intermountain LDS Hospital, where he's in charge of, I assume everything. Kim Worthland is seated to his right, is the president and CEO of Worthland Strategies, a consulting firm that specializes in delivery system and payer strategies, including, and these may be terms that you're familiar with, bundled payments, ACOs, shared savings organizations, etc. Taylor Scally is the executive director of Principal Gifts for Health Sciences at the University of Utah, with responsibility over major projects involving donor and investment funding. Roger Little is the Director of Business Applications at Optum Insight, which is a subsidiary of United Health Group. His company develops, acquires, and integrates healthcare information technologies. We have an additional panel member who may be joining us midstream. His name is Dixon Davis. He is the Vice President of Business Development at AAPC Physician Services, a company that provides medical audit, healthcare compliance, and EMR services to physician practices. Please join me in welcoming our panelists. So I've got a few questions of general interest, or what I think are general interest. And then I want to make sure that we have time for questions from you all, the audience. So I'll proceed with a few of my questions, and then hopefully you guys have a chance to voice your own. So first, panelists, and I'll hand the microphone down the line, so hopefully you're prepared to talk now, Jim. Tell us about your respective career paths. How did you get into healthcare, and how did you arrive at where you are now?
Thanks, Parker. Well, I was here at the University of Utah. I'm an undergraduate and graduated in business management here. And while I was a student here, I volunteered at Primary Children's Hospital, just a couple days a week on their rehab floor, and just kind of felt I really enjoyed that. And I always wanted to do business, but I had a real interest in community service. I did a lot with the Bennion Center when I was a student here, and different service opportunities. And I figured healthcare, being a service industry, was a way to marry my interest in business with service. And so I graduated from the U, and I went to the University of Minnesota, and I got a master's in healthcare administration and a master's in business administration, a dual degree. When I finished there, I went to did a postgraduate fellowship, which is a lot of times what happens when you're getting the master's in healthcare administration, and that was with a company called Catholic Healthcare West. They've now changed their name. They're Dignity Health, and they're a 43 hospital system in California, Arizona, and Nevada. So I worked there, and I ended up staying with that company for about 9 years. Went to Arizona as part of that company, and I started off doing business development, strategic planning, capital acquisition, that type of thing, and then transitioned over to what's traditionally called operations in the hospital, and became the director of operations there. And then I moved to Northern California to take an executive level position with a small standalone hospital called Enloe Medical Center. So the hospital I worked at in Arizona was St. Joseph's. It was one of the largest hospitals in Arizona, big, kind of similar to the university or Intermountain Medical Center, a large academic center. And I wanted to see what a smaller community hospital is like. Went to Enloe Medical Center for a couple years as a vice president of operations. And then I was recruited back to Intermountain Healthcare. Never thought I'd return to Utah. We kind of liked living away from Utah. We both grew up here, my wife and I, but it was a great opportunity, and I missed my mountains and my utes, and ended up coming back, and I've been there for 6 years, and I've been the CEO for 2 years. Want me just to pass it on down? Yeah. Okay.
Do you want to mix it up? Or? Roger, you're on. Well, my route to being in healthcare was very circuitous, and I'm not sure we've got time to hear the whole story, but let me just start off by saying one of the best commencement speeches, if not the best commencement speech I've ever heard, was I had the good fortune to be at a friend's graduation when she was graduating with her PhD from Stanford. And Steve Jobs was the commencement speaker. And if you have not read Steve Jobs' commencement speech, I would highly recommend it. But one of the things that his main point in that commencement speech was, well, I'd say two things. One, he said, you have to do what you love. And the second was, you can only connect the dots in retrospect. And that is certainly my experience in my professional life. So even though I did grow up with healthcare in my family, my dad was the CEO and administrator of LDS Hospital. And he spent his most of his career with Intermountain. Well, he spent his career with Intermountain Healthcare. And I grew up being a candy striper at LDS Hospital, and I was a unit clerk at LDS Hospital. And I remember when they were adding the addition onto LDS Hospital, the big family event was to go and see the pit and to watch that thing come up out of the ground. So while I grew up having healthcare be very much a part of my father's life, it was not anything in terms of hospital administration or healthcare administration that I contemplated at all. I graduated from the University of Utah with a degree in English, and I left Utah and went to Boston with 3 friends, and we all found jobs back there, and I found a job working for an investment banking firm. So I worked for Drexel Burnham Lambert for about 18 months, and then it was pretty clear that finance, investment banking was not the place I wanted to be. So I started looking for teaching positions. My undergrad was in English literature, and I started looking for teaching positions and came back to Salt Lake to visit for a week and interviewed at some of the school districts here. And when I got back to Boston, I received a call from the principal at Clayton Junior High. And he offered me a position teaching 7th and 8th grade English. And so while I didn't want to leave Boston, I needed to move on with what I was going to do professionally, and so I came back to Salt Lake, and I taught for 2 years at Clayton Junior High. And then I decided that I wanted to do law school. And so I decided to to take the year, leave Clayton, and I got a job as doing some clerking for Parker, McKeon, and McConkey. And Parker, McKeon, and McConkey gave me such a spectacular experience that year in being able to do various things related to law that I discovered that I did not want to be an attorney. So I remember tearfully, as I was tearfully throwing away my law school applications because I couldn't write the personal statement. I didn't want to do it, so I couldn't come up with anything. So I tearfully threw those in the garbage can on a New Year's Day and thought, I have no idea what I'm going to do. And about 3 weeks later, I got a call from Nancy Houston, who was the head of school at the Waterford School. And she had an English history position. And so I taught at the Waterford School, which is a private school in Sandy, for 3 years. And at the end of 3 years, I was getting a little antsy. And I was trying to figure out, what is the next thing? What am I going to do long term? And I wanted to combine my teaching with, I was also a facilitator for ropes courses in the summertime, with facilitation in the business arena. And so I started looking for opportunities there, and I got a job with an organizational consulting firm called Innovations. And Innovations worked with companies across the country on how do you recruit and retain the best when that pool of talent is so diverse. And it was interesting work, but I was traveling 3 weeks out of the month. And after a couple of years of that, I thought, really, I'm not sure this matters. I'm not sure what I'm doing makes a difference. And one of the things that I've learned for me is that whatever I do in my professional life, I need to be passionate about what I'm doing. I need to care. I need to feel like what I'm doing matters. So now I'm in my late 20s, and I am clear about all the things I don't want to do. I have no idea what I do want to do. And so after a lot of consideration, I made a pretty radical decision. And the decision was that I was going to go to medical school. Now, I might just remind you that my undergraduate degree was in English literature. So the last time I had had math was in high school. And I never took, I don't know that I took a science class in college. But really felt good about that decision. And just by happenstance, I went to a wedding dinner and sat next to Rich McKeon. And while I was, that evening while we were talking, I happened to say that I was thinking of making a change, and he called the next day and said, I'd love to set up a time to talk with you. So we did. It happened to be on the same day that I went to lunch with my boss from the organizational consulting firm and told her that my plan was to go back to school and to take pre-med classes starting in September. And this was in July. And she said, well, we don't have any short-term contracts, so you'll have to make this month your last month. Well, I went to meet with Rich, and Rich said that he was thinking of running for mayor of Salt Lake City, and asked what my time was like. And I said, well, as of an hour ago, I'm unemployed. So I had never been a campaign manager before. He had never been a candidate, but we had a very good strategy team. So we kicked off that mayoral campaign in August, and we ended up, with the help of many others, building a grassroots network of 1,400 volunteers, and we beat the incumbent mayor, Didi Corradini, in the primary. So now, had Rich won, it looked like I would have been deputy mayor. So I withdrew from the chemistry classes that I had started, and we just did the election through the general election, and we lost by 1%. It's a number Rich and I can both remember. We'll never forget, but we lost by 1%. So to make a long story short, well, the next, a week later, I was called by someone else who had been recruited to run for Congress. He asked me to run his campaign. So I was 2 weeks later in DC meeting with all kinds of people to start this congressional campaign. He decided to withdraw from the campaign in April, and I decided I'm going to medical school. And so I went to talk with John Madsen, who is the Senior Vice President of Health Sciences, about medical school. And at the end of our conversation, he said, the health sciences here at the university has never had anybody who represented the health sciences at the state, did the government relations. It was only main campus. With all of your political experience, how would you like to do the government relations while you take these pre-med classes? So that was 17 years ago. And what I ended up doing was figuring out how to do the government relations, took physics, took chemistry, took biology. The next session, I just worked the session, we did well. At the end of the session, he said, could we work out something that would be of interest to you? Well, he said, how much do you want medical school? And I said, this is killing me. There's a reason that I was an English major and that I was not doing the physics and the math and all of those. But anyway, so I became the first director of government and institutional relations and got a master's in public administration. And then from there, had the opportunity to be the first in every position that I had at the university. So I was the first director of government and institutional relations for the health sciences, which included University of Utah Healthcare, and became really familiar with state and federal health policy issues. Then I became the first assistant vice president for government relations and public affairs for the health sciences and University of Utah Healthcare. Then I became the first associate vice president for public affairs, marketing, and government relations, and the first vice president for government relations for the University for government relations, and had a rich professional experience here at the university, and just left in September to look at what the next chapter is going to be, and have started a consulting firm, Worthland Strategies, that's focused in healthcare strategies, branding, positioning, strategic communications, and we're seeing how that evolves.
Thanks, Kim. Well, as far as my career path, English majors are a great pathway to healthcare, because I'm also an English major. So if you're an English major out there, go into healthcare. About 3 months ago, my wife was in the kitchen, and our 6-year-old daughter walked in, and she's like, "Where's Dad?" And my wife said, "Well, he's at work." And she said, "Oh, okay." She goes, "Well, do you know what your dad does for work?" She goes, "Nothing real exciting, but he talks to a lot of people." So my wife said, "Well, he's a fundraiser, and he schmoozes for a living." So it's really interesting what my wife thinks I do, what my kids think I do, and obviously what I think I do. So I raise money for Health Sciences, and I remember a meeting I had with the Division of Infectious Disease docs. And I remember I had to give a presentation on what we're trying to do with development. And I like the term development more so than fundraising, because if you were to truly ask me, where do I spend most of my time? Most of my time is sharing with people big ideas about solving challenging problems. And about 15 to 20% of my time is actually asking people for gifts. So in this meeting with infectious disease docs, they're looking at me really funny. And I started out by saying, I look at you in the type of work and career you do, and I can't think of a job I'd like to do less. And you're probably looking at me thinking the exact same thing of how can you ask people for money. So we're a pretty good team. I didn't grow up thinking I want to be in fundraising. I started off thinking I wanted a career in student affairs. I gave campus tours at the U to pay for my college. I worked as a student recruiter for the U, going to high schools, encouraging students to come to the U for their education. I applied for law school thinking I wanted to go to law school to work for a university. I've always been sold on the idea of working in a university environment because I've always felt it was energetic and exciting. I realized very soon that I didn't want to go to law school. So, I had a friend that said, why don't you look at this master's in higher education administration? You know, you really want to work for a university. And I thought my end-all goal was to be a dean of students. So I applied to several programs. I went down to Arizona State for my master's in higher education administration. And I worked full-time as an admissions counselor down there, and then ran their campus visit programs. I did an internship with their foundation, studying their stewardship programs and looking at peer institutions on what they were doing with how did they take care of their donors. And that led to that internship that I did with them. One of the vice presidents said, "You're in the wrong field. You should really be in development." So she introduced me to the director of development for engineering at Arizona State, and I got a job working. My first development job was for the College of Engineering at Arizona State, and I worked for them for about 3 years. And the Fiesta Bowl came down, or the Utes came down to the Fiesta Bowl that year, and had an opportunity to meet Mike Matson, who ran development for the university. And he said there might be some changes and opportunities back at the U. And 6 months later, I took a job starting to really grow our out-of-state development efforts for the university. And I worked there for about 5 years. And then life circumstance, I had 3 daughters, and we thought we wanted one more child, and I got twin boys. So I couldn't be on the road all the time. And Steve Warner, who's been a great mentor and a friend and a boss, came to me and said, "We need help in health sciences. Would you be interested in a position?" And so I'm very grateful that I took him up on that offer. And I've been in development for health sciences specifically for almost 3 years. And I tell you what, I absolutely love it. The thing I love most about working in health sciences is when you're asking people to support projects, programs, you're asking them to solve really critical issues and challenges, things that impact people's health, their lives, their quality of life. And although I couldn't do the procedures, I couldn't be smart enough to be a brain surgeon, I tell you what, I really enjoy being able to share the great work that they do and the impact that they have on our community, and So I'm thrilled. My current position now is working with Dr. Vivian Lee on her initiatives and with Principal Gist for the university, and I'm enjoying it.
I'm Roger Little, and as I've listened to the panelists, I've been thinking about my story and trying to think of what would be interesting, but something that Kim said has really struck a chord in that you need to connect the dots retrospectively. And as I've looked over my career, as I graduated from the University of Utah, one of my proudest events in accounting, and one of the great things about the healthcare industry is there are very, very few careers or very, very few items taught at the university that aren't applicable in healthcare. There are a vast number of fields that are available here. I graduated in accounting, and I went into the traditional accounting role of going into public accounting, one of the big 8 at the time. That's how old I am, and worked there and got certified and did all of those great things. Moved into industry, and I found as I moved from job to job in industry that things would get automated. I would get kind of bored and antsy to move on. And I eventually decided I'd start a consulting firm in computers and accounting, and did that for about 10 years. It was a great run. It was a lot of fun, and one of my clients at the time was a small firm out by the airport that was doing data, medical data. And a little firm out there is doing a few $1 million a year, and we had a project to do all of their Y2K conversions. And so my firm was hired to go and take care of that for them. Great project for us, and at about that time I decided, you know what, now's a good exit strategy for me. And so we sold the software firm, and I went to work for this little company. Well, just about the time that I went to work for the company, it was purchased by United Health Group. And that little company today has grown from a few $1 million a year to almost $3 billion a year, and has diversified across many, many areas of the healthcare informatics arena. So it's a really fun and dynamic area to be involved with. I can say that before moving into healthcare, I often got, my jobs became routine. Since being in the healthcare industry, there are so many critical challenges. You're working with so many wonderful people that you don't have a chance to get mundane about your job. It is a great environment to be in, and I hope that anyone here is not looking at healthcare as just healthcare administration or physicians or or actuarial or those sorts of things. The field is extremely broad, and there's many, many routes to get there. I have to tell you, my wife has been in healthcare for 35 years as a candy striper at Cottonwood Hospital and pediatrics, and now she works at Tosh, and it took me 20 years to kind of get the idea that healthcare was the right place to go. But it is a phenomenal place to be, to really have wonderful experiences and really grow personally and professionally.
So it sounds like majoring in English is the way to go if you want a career in healthcare. And not to suggest that you all have any regrets about the circuitous path to getting where you are now. But if you were to go back and putting yourself in the shoes of people in the audience, what would you do differently, or what kinds of activities and experiences would you seek out if you knew that this was the end game, if that makes sense? And if you could limit your answers to a couple of minutes, that would be great.
I've thought about that a lot, and I think I'm connecting the dots. I'm pretty pleased with the way my career's gone. I'd set some goals and have achieved those goals, and kind of knew early on that I wanted to do healthcare, and I just ended up being, Roger's right. It's a very broad field, and you can end up a lot of places. And 20 years ago when I was thinking about it, a lot of it was steered toward hospital administration. And so I often thought, well, maybe I should have gone and been a nurse for a couple years. That would have helped me a lot. But really, the only thing is, I think about it now with what healthcare is dealing with right now with the Affordable Care Act, is I probably would have figured out a way that I could do an internship in Washington. I wanted to do that, just wasn't in the cards. But to go spend some time in Washington to learn how Washington works, because fortunately or unfortunately, however you want to define it, we have to deal with Washington and with politics a lot, and it would help with the understanding on how can we react and achieve our objectives of providing, high quality, affordable health care for the population, and do it in a way that we're aligned with everything that the government's requiring.
Well, I often say the best decision I ever made was to go to medical school, and the best decision I ever made was not to go to medical school. Because without that decision, I wouldn't be in healthcare. But I think if healthcare had been something that I had been interested in, and I had, been a unit clerk, and I had done volunteer work, but I thought of it too narrowly. So I guess what I would advise is to find ways to explore the breadth of healthcare. I was thinking of it in terms of the medical professionals. So you could be a doctor, you could be a nurse, you could be a physical therapist. That was sort of what I was thinking about. Even though my dad was in hospital administration, I didn't get what that really was. And so, I think what I would do if I were looking to get in healthcare would be to do various things, shadow people. I mean, like what Jim was saying, I had several people when I was doing state government relations ask if they could just spend time with me during the legislative session working on various healthcare issues. I'd do that. I'd look, just as Roger was saying, spend time in areas that might line up with the kinds of things, the kind of work that you like to do. If you like to do computers and IT and accounting, spend time in a physician's, practice, in a hospital, with a payer, and get a sense of the breadth and depth of the opportunities in healthcare.
I'd agree with Kim on the point of finding mentors and finding people that you want to emulate. And I'd expand it also to, in my profession, instead of saying fundraising, it really boils down to I'm sales for health sciences. And in sales, if I could go back, and I still am trying to do this, I get to develop the relationships with the doctors as much as possible to understand what the research is and how it's applicable and important to the average Joe, and gain that knowledge, because so I almost have to cultivate the researchers and the doctors to understand what they're doing in order to sell a big idea and line the dots up. So for me, and I'm doing it now, and if I could do it over again, I'd do it even more, is it's really college over again of study, and try to grasp as big of a picture, because health science is so broad. I mean, just here at the university, when you're looking from everything from genetics research all the way down to public health and healthy population health management, there's a lot of stuff in between, and you can't sell what you don't know.
I would really try to encourage everybody to become absolutely the best in your field that you can be. If you want to be involved in healthcare, you're entering an arena where you're going to be dealing with very, very smart people, highly motivated people that are anxious to be doing the best job that they can do. And so you want to make sure you're bringing skills to the table where you are the best at what you're doing, and that you're anxious to be engaged, that you can, learn, you want to continue to learn, but that you're bringing skills to the table. And so make sure that you're taking time in your education to set a groundwork and a lifelong path of continual learning and continually enhancing your skills. As you do that, you will help others around you to become better and better. Healthcare is a target-rich environment. There are lots of problems to solve by a lot of many different disciplines, but you need to be very, very good at your discipline to be effective. And so that's what I really encourage people to do, is become really very, very proficient, become the best in your area of proficiency, get to the mentors, have them help you steer your path through the course, but be good at what you do.
Thanks. Okay, I have one more question, and then to the extent that you all have questions, there will be time for that. What are, so kind of going with this, be expert in your particular sphere of interest, what are the hottest issues or topics that you deal with in your current job, or what are the burgeoning hot topics or issues that you see?
That's a hard one, 'cause there's lots. For me specifically, as an administrator at a hospital, I think the challenge is with the way healthcare is changing and the demand that it become more affordable. You know, the Affordable Care Act, which in many ways is a misnomer because it's more about access, but that's another story. But we need to make healthcare is really expensive, and it's there's a lot of waste in healthcare. There's a lot of waste in hospitals, and so as we're transitioning from this history we've had that's paid on fee-for-service, that's paid on volumes, that's paid on a lot of tests that doctors are doing and bringing business to the hospital, to more of, it was mentioned, population health, creating value, capitation, which used to be an evil word but makes a lot of sense. For me, it's how can I transition this hospital to that model, and still, because people are still going to get sick. You know, LDS Hospital's been open on the Hill for 107 years, and then intriguing thing about a hospital is we never close. You know, you're open 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. There's no locks on the door. We don't go home for the weekend. We've got to be there for the community. And then the other challenge is no one wants to come see you at a hospital. When people come, they're sick, they're depressed, they're sad, they're angry sometimes, they're nervous, and yet they trust that you'll take really good care of them and do it at an appropriate cost. So I think the challenge right now for me that I look at is I've got to figure out a way to make sure we are really efficient, that we provide high value and high quality in order to save money and make this an affordable privilege for people to have. It's not a commodity, it's a privilege to have health care, and in this country we need to provide that level of care and that affordability to everyone, and it's just figuring out in this big complex, you know, $400 million organization how we do that.
Well, as Jim said, we're in a huge time of transition in healthcare, and moving from a fee-for-service reimbursement system to value-based. And one of the biggest challenges that I'm helping some of my clients sort through is how do you pace and sequence the change? What are the strategies that you set up to continue to thrive in an environment that's still reimbursing more on fee-for-service or episodic payment, and develop the competencies to position to do well in a value-based reimbursement? That's one big thing. The other big thing that I am helping my clients with is creating simplicity out of complexity, being able to describe what's going on in a way that's understandable to internal and external audiences. Tell a story about how this is evolving that can be understood. So whether that's in advocacy, or that's with a medical group, or other constituencies, it really is making things understandable so that you can be on the same page and then develop the strategies.
Some of the hot topics in development, not just in health sciences, are the fact that I don't believe we're in the business of asking people for gifts anymore. I believe we're in the business of asking people to invest, and to invest in the future of healthcare. So that's a big topic that's changing in fundraising, in that people want a return on their investment, not a financial return, but an impact return. The other thing with development that's changing right now is that oh God, what word am I thinking of? The universities are no longer agencies of the state, they're enterprises. We receive such few dollars of our base funding from the state, and the state does a great job of supporting the university, but the future, if the university really wants to excel, if we really want to change, it's going to be through development. It's going to be through fundraising. We just got an email out yesterday about how NIH funding is going to be cut, and so development's going to have to pick that up. So if we really want to be an enterprise, it's going to come from philanthropy. And then some of the really hot topics, healthcare transformation is huge at the University of Utah. From a fundraising standpoint, we're developing an Institute for Healthcare Transformation. We have a wonderful project with genetics called the Utah Genome Project. And then we're also very big on global health. And all those have great opportunities and exciting adventures to come.
I've had the chance to hire quite a few people over the years, and I tell every one of them that if you don't like change, healthcare is not the right place for you to be. And the pace of that change is accelerating, not decreasing. It is invigorating to me to be involved in that type of environment. And that is both a wonderful thing about healthcare, but it's also a huge challenge. The rate of change is increasing all the time. And I think it's just managing that change, both from from my perspective, I'm on the business administration side, handling that from a business process perspective, from a software perspective, systems perspective, is very difficult, but I love it. It's a great thing. So.
Okay, we're open for questions from the audience, if there are any.
I just kind of want to know, why is healthcare so expensive? What's causing that? Honestly, because we do things a lot different in the United States than the rest of the industrialized world. And I think a lot of it has to do with profit and overhead. So do you guys know what's actually causing that?
Wait. If you want the mic.
That is a loaded question, and I think that the question is, why is it so expensive, healthcare? And that it's, we're different than a lot of the other industrialized nations with how expensive it is. People will argue we're a litigious country, so that's the argument for tort reform, and that a lot of the reason for overutilization is physicians or providers are worried that they're going to get sued, and so they order an MRI and a CT and all that. Pharmaceutical companies, there's arguments there that, in order all the research we do with all these drugs and they come out and why they have a patent, they can charge a lot more money. There's just overall infrastructure and technology. We're really attracted to technology and how important that is to us. And I think it's a mix of all of that. There are private, there's nonprofit companies, and that doesn't mean you don't make a profit. It just means that you don't have shareholders. There's for-profit companies, but there's a lot of reasons. But I think a lot of it is, in my opinion, is utilization. We're accustomed to a very rich healthcare here. We all, there's lots of surgeries, there's MRIs. We think we want these luxurious services rather than focusing on just pure prevention. A lot of it's how incentives are set up, where physicians are paid more when they do surgeries and when they do procedures. And that goes back to the way reimbursement was set up through Medicare, versus primary care doctors aren't paid a whole bunch of money to keep you healthy and out of the hospital. So I could go on and on, but those are some of my thoughts. I don't know if anyone else on the panel.
I think the only thing I'd add to that is one of the things that's happening is to line up the incentives so that instead of having everything lined up so that you get episodic care and physicians are reimbursed for each treatment, we're starting to figure out reimbursements that will align incentives so that you get the right care at the right time by the right provider, and the care is coordinated. And so there's a risk shift in order to line those incentives up from the financiers of care, or the payers, to the providers, so people have more skin in the game. I would also say the other thing that's going to change and help, and that is that all of us will, over the course of time, start having to pay for more of the health care that we get with higher deductible plans. And that will change every conversation, every decision about, what kind of care you're going to get and how much you really need it when your out of pocket might be, $1,200. So we're starting to do things to align incentives to lower the costs.
I want to ask about, on the same note, there was the article Bitterpill in Time magazine about a month ago that had the same cost issue. But I figured, as Intermountain Healthcare, you guys are way better than the University of Healthcare as far as identifying weight, keeping your weight low, and gaining lean. How would that affect, as you rightly pointed out, we are going to shift more towards outcome-based reimbursement as well as procedure-based reimbursement. Where do you think the change will happen? How long is it going to take for this change to actually come into effect?
We'll start. I started last time, so you go
Well,
first.
just give it. I think, first of all, the pace of change in terms of is happening at different rates across the country, and so you can look at various markets and you'll find that where they have shared savings programs, which is based more on aligning those incentives and providing value-based care. So the pace of change is happening at a different rate depending on where you are. But I'll just give one analogy that Governor Levitt gives that I think's really great. So the first thing is, there's no question that change is happening. The only question is how fast. And so he said, it's like we're at Cinderella's ball. And we know that we're going to turn into pumpkins at midnight. But there's no clock around. And so some people are dancing close to the door, and some people think they've got, or some institutions, payers, think they've got a lot of time. So they're dancing away from the door. And his advice is that everybody should start dancing close to the door.
And I would just follow up with that on. The article in Time, that was a long article, and you read through it, you're in the hospital business, there's a lot of things that you could argue. But I think the gist of it is that it is an issue and it's expensive. And at Intermountain, we have challenges too. I think that the nice thing about Utah, it's just a snippet, the cost per capita for healthcare in this country is around $7,500, $7,600 per person. In Utah, it's about half of that. And one of the benefits, I think, in Utah is we have a very collaborative environment between the university, Intermountain, HCA, that we work closely together and seek for best practice. But we're definitely not done. And a lot of the stuff in that Time magazine article is real. I will tell you, sometimes hospitals are challenged and things are expensive because of the requirement we have to take care of anyone that comes in. If you imagine if you owned a bike shop and someone could come in your bike shop and say, I want this bike, and I'm going to walk out with this bike, and I may pay you, I may not, but you have to give me this bike. That'd be hard to be in business. But that's essentially with healthcare. If people aren't insured and they come in, or let's say they are kind of underinsured, they come in and they have appendicitis and you take out their appendix, well, if they have the ability to pay you, but they aren't paying you, you can't go and put the appendix back in. So it's challenging for the uninsured. Now, that's what the Affordable Care Act is going to help with, and that's one of the good things about that is increasing the coverage, but there's still the cost implications.
We have time for one more question. Yeah.
Have any of you guys started, or within your organization, started your ICD-10 implementation?
I think the IT guy should answer that.
What is ICD-10?
Yeah.
Well, let's see if I dare go down this path. ICD-10 is going to be the new coding activity that's going on to code all the various procedures that are going on. Our organization is very involved in helping organizations work through that ICD-10 process, but I'm not doing that personally. Okay. And so whether or not how far down Intermountain Healthcare is or other organizations down that path, but we're very focused on it as an organization. This is one that is we need to be dancing very close to the door on, and it's here, and so we need to make sure that that's going on. So I guess that's my answer for that.
No, we're about the same. Yes, we are looking at it. We'll be ready to implement. But as a large system with 23 hospitals and 32,000 employees, I don't know specifically about that. That's kind of, I'm way far from the door on that one. But we definitely are looking at it. We'll be prepared. I'll get your number.
So if you guys have any more pointed questions, I'm sure the panelists and other folks who are here will be more than happy to answer those for you. Please join me again in thanking the panelists for their participation and insights.